I'm David Zabrowski from Scripps Networks Interactive, and it's my pleasure to bring you this last panel of the day, best practices for migrating to a cloud-based encoding platform. I've had the great pleasure of speaking with the three gentlemen to my right, and I'd like to let you guys introduce yourselves and please provide some background in terms of what you do.
My name is Jeff Malkin. I run a company called Encoding.com. You can probably guess what we do. We are a cloud-based transcoding software as a service. The company is about 4 years old, and we've certainly seen quite a bit of migration of moving content workflows from purely infrastructure to hybrid to cloud and so forth and so on. And happy to talk today about some of those practices we see of pros and cons of what areas and what components of the workflow make sense to move to the cloud and when.
Great. Hi, I'm Stephen Sabanjohn. I run digital engineering for NBC Universal. And what my group does is we handle a lot of the transcoding and syndication of content outside of our doors to all of our websites, mobile, VOD, EST, et cetera.
I'm Dustin Insulesky. I run product marketing for Elemental Technologies, and we are a video processing company that has traditionally sold packaged appliances using GPU-based technology to accelerate video processing for live and on-demand applications. We write all of our own software, and so what we've done is adapted that software for use in virtualized instances running on Amazon's GPU instances in the cloud. And so we provide our appliance-based customers overflow into the cloud for peak processing and excess capacity.
Which is certainly one great use case for leveraging cloud.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Stephen, if you might, can I start with you? I'd like
Sure.
to ask you, in your background at NBC Universal, what was it that drove you to actually move to the cloud?
We're still considering the cloud in a lot of our ventures right now. There's still a big perception problem of the cloud that we're just starting to break through. We've done a lot of analysis of, should we move to the cloud, should we not move to the cloud, and it's looking promising. The technology is getting there. The perception on security is getting there inside. There's just a few more people to convince to move there. Where we have found some great benefits with the cloud, if you can call this the cloud, is with our Olympics ventures. So it's no secret that we were partnered with YouTube for the Olympics. And if you consider them a cloud, they're a big enough company, you kind of can do that. They brought in the content straight from the Olympics Committee, and then we were able to use their expansive resources and also use some software services to quickly edit that content and put it online to NBCOlympics.com. It was incredibly helpful because we didn't have to deal with the challenges of bringing the content into our walls, standing up so many hard editors, Final Cuts and Avids. I mean, they were used for certain pieces, but for the web clips, they weren't used. We were using cloud-based solutions to do mark in, mark out. The turnaround time was incredibly fast, and it really was beneficial to us operating in that capacity to drive as many clips as we put online.
So in that case, you were dealing with content that more or less was delivered directly to you in the cloud,
Correct.
Managed and manipulated in the cloud, and then off to the end destination.
We see a lot of challenges when we need to come inside. Mm-hmm. If content's delivered inside, we feel in a lot of cases we should operate on it inside and then send the smaller content out versus sending the large content outside of our walls to then be further processed. At least when it comes to time-based events, when the Olympics was a great example of that. We couldn't take the time to send it outside of our walls and then go through a cloud solution then to distribute it because of the timing involved. But because it was delivered immediately to the cloud as the ingest point, it definitely provided a lot of benefits.
Okay. And what about cases where the cloud isn't the ingest point? How have you dealt with that? And when are your consumers coming to you and looking at? Excuse me. Oh, thank you so much. with a lot of folks, they have a lot of their content already within their walls, within their storage. Where have you seen some of your clients run into either challenges or success stories when it comes to moving from an in-house environment out to the cloud?
Well, there's definitely certain advantages that the cloud provides. Some more obvious, some less. The obvious ones would be around the notion of infinite resources, around scalability, around elastic capacity, so the ability to dynamically spin up and spin down servers as you need, processors. So, a lot of times when there's speed to market issues, the cloud becomes a valuable resource. Or in your example even earlier, from an overflow perspective, when you're dealing with more content than you have processors in house for. But what we've seen at Encoding.com over the last 4 years, as in this migration towards adopting more software as a service components to your workflow from the cloud, the tipping point has been around from infrastructure versus cloud SaaS, has been around the fact that the technologies are changing so rapidly. So what your infrastructure supports today, I can guarantee is not going to be what you're supporting 3 years from now. And if you just follow the path of what YouTube has supported from a format perspective over the last 10 years, it constantly changes. So, one of the pros of leveraging a cloud provider is that it's their job to stay on top of the latest and greatest as these technologies are changing, so you don't have to. And we have seen companies, not dissimilar to yours, where, strong concerns about moving large files around the public internet or security of those files are important objections. But, then you start, tipping the scales when you realize you have to keep reinvesting in that architecture to stay on top of the latest and greatest.
Okay. Dustin, what about you?
Yeah, a lot of the ways that our customers are managing getting content into the cloud is using accelerated services like Aspire or Signiant. Those are great companies doing exciting things in moving data around. But a lot of our customers actually, we were surprised when we first got into the cloud, they were already there. So they already had files in the cloud. Studios are moving content around between their post houses. Other companies are taking delivery of content sourced externally, like music videos. MTV, for instance, they do a lot of processing of their own content on site, but they still source music videos externally. So why bring that stuff down, process it, and then put it back up? Why not just leave it up there and process it? So sometimes it's all about the logistics around, where the content is coming from, and it just makes sense to leave it in the cloud. Yeah. Other times, in an overflow scenario, like I was describing earlier, our customers are doing things like direct connect services with Amazon or accelerated services, and they'll actually use our appliances to condition content for accelerated delivery to the cloud as well. So there are a lot of different ways that our customers are getting content to the cloud, and it really just depends on your workflow and how it makes sense for you.
Speaking of workflow, it seems that one of the most disruptive things about cloud encoding is where does the content reside? It seems to be a challenge for lots of media asset management vendors, as well as teams responsible for storing and archiving the content and being aware of what variants of your content is where. From your experience, are you seeing more content being stored solely in the cloud, or is it more a case of having intermediates in the cloud for further transcoding? What's your experience on?
Again, we're seeing a lot of both, actually. Amazon actually just got certified by the MPAA. So in terms of security, that's really helped a lot of our studio customers, particularly vendors of studios, get their content into the cloud. And like I said, surprisingly, a lot of them just already had the content there. Amazon's got a lot of security features. A lot of banks are up and running on Amazon. So I think a lot of studios were actually already comfortable with the security of storing content in the cloud. I think it was really a question of economics at that point. And so as prices have come down, a lot of customers of ours are looking at when they move content into the cloud, not only are they able to take advantage of elastic resources for processing, but now all of a sudden they have a disaster recovery option as well. So they've got replicated storage in that sense, and there's an additional benefit there.
Yeah, we work with a lot of mezzanine content, from the cloud perspective. The studio content that we work with and broadcasters, they're not leveraging, at least in the workflows that we're a part of archiving, in the cloud, because that would be ridiculously expensive. Right. Not that iPhone's much cheaper, right? So we tend to see, most of our customers are storing a rendition or multiple renditions of content in the cloud, but from a long-form premium content perspective, we're not seeing this, the J2000 files stored up in the, in the cloud mainly because, as you said, is the expense.
What about some of the objections to cloud uptime? And you touched on security as well. Do you see that starting to wane within most organizations, or at least some of the mindset around it changing, let's say now as opposed to 2 to 4 years ago?
Yeah, I'll take a quick stab at that. I mean, you brought up an example that reminded me with the MTV. I mentioned to you recently, 4 years ago, I had met with the CTO of Viacom at the time, who's not there anymore, who basically said to me right off the bat, we do everything ourselves, we do it all internally, that's our mandate, so, good to know you. And, but as I was leaving after a 5-minute conversation, he said, well, and he brought up this example of, user-generated content. So it wasn't we actually were doing the music videos for MTV that were being ingested from external resources. But he brought up the idea of the user-generated video content. Maybe that's a way we can start to work together. Cut to 4 years later, it's not been a revolutionary change in thinking with Viacom. It's been an evolutionary, but they're now integrating third-party services into their media workflow, and so in a quick 3 to 4 years, it's changed, I would say, fairly dramatically in that thinking.
Yeah, from the studio side, I'm definitely seeing attitudes start to change, and a lot of times services that we're already being integrated with and people that we're already delivering our content to are in the cloud, and once that's brought up, saying, oh, well, your objections to the cloud are great, but Netflix is in the cloud, so when we're delivering to Netflix, you're actually delivering to the cloud. So, can we move that model up a little bit more and maybe use that as a distribution model as well, because it's already out there?
Mm-hmm. What about concerns about existing infrastructure and hardware, and and deprecating that, or moving away from that investment? That seems to be a big sticking point for a lot of folks, that they already have a lot of capital invested in it.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's actually a big focus of ours. It's funny because it sounds sort of contradictory, but we really emphasize maximizing your infrastructure using cloud resources. And when people hear that, they kind of, what? That doesn't make sense. But, what we're suggesting is between buying cycles or separated workflows, you can actually leverage the cloud for different things or to span those gaps and still really get the most out of the infrastructure that you've already invested in. So you might have your day-to-day workflow or production workflow going through your on-premise appliances, but you might have a new product that you want to test out or develop, or you might have a library conversion project that you need to spin up 100 instances for. So a lot of times it's just about really taking advantage of the cloud in ways that you might not have been able to do otherwise, and still utilizing the infrastructure that you have in place.
Yeah, I mean, there's a number of customers, and I'm not sure you even know this, that we share. That have elementals in their infrastructure that use Encoding.com as well. And first of all, you're talking about a lot of content, so there's a big need there. But also that there's certain use cases for each, pros and cons. So, in a lot of the workflows that we're integrated in, I see infrastructure there that's being utilized, that they're adding to, that they're buying more of. But at the same time, there are reasons that, for whatever their workflow requirements are, that it just makes sense. Maybe some of that content's in the cloud already. Maybe it's a closed captioning requirement that one encoder does and the other doesn't. Whatever it might be, that they're leveraging this hybrid approach. And I would say that is a big trend that we're seeing in the broadcast space.
Absolutely.
Yeah. From a workflow perspective, a lot of times we're bringing in this big content, we're assembling it, and we don't want to spend the time to make it a solid file going out the other end in order to upload it somewhere. So, we're dealing a lot with QuickTime reference files that are referencing different pieces of content on storage, and at that point it makes sense to just go straight to your output format from there through a transcoder. But when we're talking about archive content, when we're talking about library content that, well, we just signed a deal to send every episode of every Law & Order we've ever made to XYZ company in this other format. That definitely puts strains on resources and can be a good use case for, it's almost as simple as checking a box in the cloud saying, here, take all that, now go to another format, churn away, spin up as many resources or a managed number of resources that you can that will take that off of the equipment that you have in-house. So you still have that in-house investment. You're not wasting that in-house investment. And I don't even know if I'd call it overflow capacity, because that shows that you'd be past your in-house, but it's almost like standing up a separate farm. It's like a dedicated instance just to handle your secondary distribution.
So handling spikes is an ideal scenario.
Well, spikes and just different workflows, different projects. Sometimes you might have even different teams managing, different sets of production. So spikes are absolutely use case, but there are probably, half a dozen or a dozen more.
Do you think that the whole emerging, it's not even emerging anymore, but the whole mobile market has really pushed this as well?
Oh man, I used to say that I should have, hopefully this is not too soon, but I should have sent Steve Jobs, some flowers for really helping explode my business, because when he launched iOS requiring, HTTP live streaming on those devices, all of a sudden there was a world of large media and entertainment companies who had infrastructure investments that couldn't support it because it didn't exist before that. And, we were fortunate to be one of the first to support it, not the only ones. And all of a sudden, that was very eye-opening for a lot of broadcasters to look at a cloud provider and say, oh man, is this going to happen again? And, and how do we prepare for that again? And so when I think about mobile, it's the complexity around proprietary technologies and the fact that there's new devices on market every month there's no standardization. And so it's very difficult to maintain that from an infrastructure perspective.
What do you see this doing to some of the workflows upstream of encoding? One of the things that we noticed at Scripps is that it's really pushing for us to get a fully digital workflow and get away from tape, have everything in a format that we can flip out to other formats and move around quite quickly.
In many cases, we're 100% digital. We're getting a file in. There's obvious broadcast prep that has to happen on that file, but then once that's done, we're dropping it into transcoders and transcoding in everything from the broadcast file down to our web files and our mobile files, all off of one source file, kind of flowing that straight out. And in the business that we're in, timing is more important than anything, because we get last-minute changes right up to air. So, and then we have very tight turnarounds to when that needs to be on the web and on mobile for the next day. Usually around 2 a.m. in the morning Pacific time is when the content from that day needs to be up online, so that people waking up on the East Coast, if they wanted to catch the Tonight Show monologue before they go to work, they can watch it. That's incredibly important to our company. So that's why we have to have these very efficient workflows to get that content through all the way 100% digital.
Yeah, we're seeing the same thing, and we even see a lot of our customers are going back through their archives and digitizing their entire asset catalog. So, it's amazing to see this conversion taking place. I mean, some of these customers of ours have assets going back to, the 40s, and it's all got to be digital now. Yeah.
Excellent. What about the fears of the cloud? That's one that, when Amazon had some hiccups last week, one of the questions that I was asked is, are you still up and running and are we still encoding? And fortunately, we could say, yes, we were. I was not entirely sure when asked the question, but found out very shortly thereafter that, yes, indeed, our provider at that point was up and running. But it's one question where I think it's one area where there's still above and beyond the security issues, there's a feeling of loss of control. It's not within your physical domain. Therefore, you're more vulnerable as a company. Have you seen that starting to change? And what are you guys doing to
Well, first and foremost, like anything that's critical operations, you need to have redundancy. So if you are working with a cloud vendor from whatever component of that workflow, if they're not based in multiple multiple clouds, I think you're at some serious risk. We've seen Amazon go down, we've seen Rackspace go down. I've never seen them both go down at the same time. And hopefully that doesn't happen. To manage that risk for our customers, we're in not only Amazon, many zones in Amazon and Rackspace, but we launched our own private cloud as well. Because we just, there are certain operations, like we have a lot of news organization customers where it just can't go down. I mean, not like your situation, but for us, with file-based, we don't do live, we do file-based content, but has to be up within, minutes after the news event happens, and we have to be up and have to be available. So I think that there's definitely a perceived concern from customers around the loss of control that you said. But I also think that it's one of those things where we're starting to see, this is happening over, 5-7 years. So you're starting to see a little bit of the old guard moving on to new things and the new guard coming in. And I think the new guard coming in has a little bit more in their DNA to leverage cloud and leverage SaaS in general. And, maybe their role in their VP, technology positions is changing from not having to have their arms around everything in-house, but figuring out the most efficient, workflows.
We have a very different look at things as we're primarily a broadcasting company, and so our broadcast facility is in Englewood Cliffs, New Jersey, and we knew that was hardened to be hit by a hurricane. It was hit by a hurricane. We had power, we had air conditioning, everything worked fine. We had no interruption to air, and that was a great success story. The problem that we're going to see for anything other than some of these library and cloud situations, if it's in our critical path, we have to make sure that every single one of those pieces are put in place, as well as our pieces are put in place. Because I know our facility will make it. We've been proven just recently, but I don't know if we're even having concerns with ISPs coming in and out of the building. Well, I know that we'll have power. I know that we'll be able to have satellite transmission, but the substation down the street for our ISP provider may not have the same level of redundancy that we have. So even down to that level, we can't even get to the cloud at that point. We may be cut off. So that's one of the bigger concerns that we're having as far as anything in our critical workflow getting to air.
Yeah, and most of our customers, I would say 99% of our customers are actually appliance customers that are using the cloud as well. So in those instances, they have redundant systems in place, on site. And then what we're doing in the cloud, like Jeff talked about, is redundant as well. So we're spanning multiple availability zones, multiple clouds. And even the cloud providers will tell you, build for failure, design for failure, break it as often as you can to make sure that it still works. And it sometimes amazes me when, a provider goes down or a region goes. I've never seen an entire provider go down. Azure was pretty close. But, that services, not to pick on anybody, but when Netflix was out, I was sort of amazed by that because not all of Amazon was down at that point. And I would have thought that Netflix would have been across, virtually every zone. So I think that people are starting to understand and build for that more and more, and you're starting to see less and less concern. And then also just, hedging your bets across both on-premise as well as the cloud base.
Part of that, I think, is when the cloud was first kind of pitched, no one really knew what it was.
Yep,
and they're like, it's the cloud, it's out there.
Right.
But, the reality is when you're looking at that, in order to make sure that you're covered, you have to know how the cloud is constructed. You have to know, well, the cloud is really just a bunch of shared data centers that are interconnected with each other. So I need to plan as if I have multiple data centers. I mean, I don't have to buy the data center, but I have to spread my resources among them so that if one data center goes down, then I'm obviously covered on another, just like if you were to own them.
Absolutely.
That's
a really good way of looking at it.
It's becoming a lot more clear now, I think, than when cloud was initially launched and executives were getting pitches of, it's the cloud, it never goes down. Well, there's a data center behind it.
Right.
It might go down.
Right. It will.
It will go down.
It also depends on the type of content we're talking about. If it's live, and you guys work with a lot of live, and you obviously work with a lot of live, then it's even more critical than, many of our customers are file-based, if it took an extra hour to get online, it wouldn't kill their business, wouldn't be so critical. And so I think a lot depends on in the pros and cons of where you and how you leverage cloud. It has to do with the how critical and how fast that content has to be available.
Okay, so lesson 1, plan for redundancy. It's going to fail, it's going to break, have a backup.
Absolutely.
What were, just some general other principles that you'd believe that you would espouse to folks who are actually moving into the cloud for the first time? From a planning perspective, I know when we did it at Scripps, we had some very hard deadlines. We had some definite outcomes, and we had a little bit of gray that we had to figure out as we were going, but we knew we had to start in order to get there. From your perspective, looking back on moving to the cloud, what pitfalls would you
I would say definitely plan the sourcing of your content, because if you're pulling it all the way in-house and then need to send it back out to the cloud, well, that just wasted a lot of time and a lot of resources. If you can source it in the cloud, do that, because then you can act on it immediately. And if you can't source it in the cloud, make sure that you have a good mezzanine format. Mezzanine format is very important. High enough quality to hit all your goals, has all the metadata that you need inside of it, such as closed captioning or anything like that. But it's a tough balance. How high does that need to be to hit your goals? Yet, even with accelerated transport, there's still time to transport that out. So you have to find that balance of how long you're willing to wait, how much you're willing to pay for storage costs, et cetera.
Yeah, and I think there are advantages in certain file types as well. So when you're looking at designing your workflow, if you can use, say, a ProRes file where you can scan for a move atom and immediately begin processing the file as it's in transfer, that saves you a lot of time. So you can actually sort of bury the encode in the transfer. So by the time the file's actually been moved from point A to point B, it's been transcoded.
Yeah, I think at a higher level, in both scenarios you're describing, it's about what are your speed requirements. So when you think about your workflow, how quickly does that content have to be made available? And there's a big difference between, I would actually argue against the cloud if you were kind of on a single file basis, need to have that file available immediately. Well, it's certainly going to be faster if you have a dedicated appliance sitting right in, like any big data, you want to have the data as close as possible to the processors, right? But if you had the flip side example of that would be if you had a catalog of content that needed to be up, in a week. Well, it's going to you might take a month on infrastructure, but the parallelization of the cloud can get that done in a week. So really, you really have to think through the speed requirements for your workflow on the pros and cons versus infrastructure and cloud.
Well, and not only that, but it might take you a month just to get more infrastructure, on site.
Exactly.
So a lot of times it's about the timing and how quickly you need to be to market. So a lot of our customers actually get started with the cloud first, and it's not until later that they move to a ground-based appliance because timing is an issue, but economies are an issue as well, and the economics aren't always in favor of the cloud, for data transfer issues and processing costs over long periods of time. So, often once they reach that point where an appliance does make sense, then they'll bring it in-house and then use the cloud to continue, bursting and things like that.
So we're getting close to wrapping. And before we open up to Q&A, what I'd like to ask you guys is, what do you think are going to be some of the biggest trends you're going to see in cloud encoding over the next 12, 18 months? Jeff, can I start with you? Yeah,
I'm just thinking about it for a second. We're kind of we're a lagging indicator generally because we're very customer driven on what we build, but so we tend to be at the back end of what the foremost technologies are. For example, H.265 or MPEG Dash. We're not focused on because our customers aren't supporting that yet. So we're not at the forefront. I can tell you what we're seeing just general trend wise, which I see extending, is certainly much more adoption of adaptive bitrate. So whether MPEG Dash becomes that end solution or not, it's HLS and IIS, smooth streaming, and HDS. We're seeing a lot more of that, and I think from a workflow perspective, we're definitely and have been, and this is a little bit self-serving, but I I believe it's happening where you're seeing that a lot of companies now are moving away from, out-of-the-box online video platform solutions that, have all these components in one solution to rolling their own. They, build their own CMS, they, build their own transcoding solution, whether it's, using infrastructure or cloud or hybrids therein, using the best-of-breed video players, the JW, the Flow player, using the best-of-breed, analytic providers, Visible Measure, 2Mogul, whatever. And by doing so and stitching that together with APIs, you now have a more cost-effective video workflow and a video platform and a much more powerful one because you're getting the best-of-breed for each component. And I'm starting to see a lot more of maybe the old world companies starting to adopt that now as well.
Yeah, I think from our perspective, we see, Dash representing more formats, not less.
Yeah.
I think everybody wants the one format to end them all, but I just don't think that's the reality based on our experience. We definitely, the cloud is a great use case for adapting to new formats. If you're a studio and all of a sudden you need to retranscode everything for ultraviolet, the cloud is a perfect scenario for that. So we see a lot more formats coming out. Interestingly for us, we really focused on file-based processing in the cloud to begin with because, like you said, we're driven by our customers. But in the last couple of months, we've gotten a lot of demand for live in the cloud.
Yep.
So we've started adapting our live solution for the cloud as well. And we're actually doing a lot of work out of the UK. For some reason, the UK tends to drive a lot of that for us. So I think live is moving to the cloud really quickly, right behind files now.
Great.
Yeah, I agree with both. I mean, I see the studios starting, with some of the security that, the certifications that are now in place, especially for archive, for library content.
Mm-hmm.
And with the amount of deals that can be made, and as new deals are signed, every time a deal is signed, we have our standard formats, but they're not always included in that deal, and it may be re-encode the entire library in a different format. And as those deals are starting to pile up, it does strain home-based infrastructure. So I'm definitely seeing that becoming more acceptable, and over the next months, we'll start to see more openness towards that. Even the distribution of that, just because you have it transcoded into the right format, even if you have one format, you may need to send it to 5 different people. Well, now you're using your bandwidth 5 times that format size to get out of your walls. So it's not only a hardware transcoding or an encoding problem, it's also a bandwidth problem of getting out to the distribution partners that you have that is starting to become an issue even with massive circuits. It's ramping up so fast that it's hard to keep up.
Excellent. Well, thank you. I'd like to open up to any questions at this point. Anyone? 1 second, we're going to get some mics down here.
Hi, guys.
Hello.
So what are the top, let's say, 3 decision criteria or decision factors that are at the inflection point of whether a customer of any of yours chooses to go in-house with some hardware-based solution of some sort or goes out to the cloud? What are the key determining factors in making that choice?
I would say I used to believe that it was the instant, and I said this earlier, that it was the instant, the dynamic elasticity of the cloud. You don't have to provision your resources ahead of time. You can spin up and spin down resources as need. And I used to believe that coupled with the scalability, of the kind of the infinite scalability were the key driving, criteria. But I've come to learn from working with the CTOs that I work with that the tipping point has been the trying to stay on top of the latest and greatest formats. So, when you invest in that infrastructure, you're not in every solution, but a lot of solutions, you are betting on certain formats for the next few years, and it's changing faster than that. So you have antiquated, infrastructure, much faster time than you've amortized that. So I think that's really become a tipping point for a lot of customers deciding to move to the cloud.
Yeah, I think for us, there's that as well. And we're a software-based solution, so we deploy upgrades to our appliances continuously. So that's less of an issue for our customers, but I think where they're more focused is in time to market. So if they've got a big project coming up that they need to get out quickly, that they haven't provisioned resources for, like I said before, by the time it takes to actually get those resources on site, it could be too late. So that's a big factor. The other factor is duration in terms of what does the project lifecycle look like. Everybody gears up for 2 years for the Olympics, and then it lasts 2 weeks, right? So, those types of workflows are great for the cloud because you don't want to invest in a lot of infrastructure to support a 2-week event that you may ultimately not require.
Underutilized CapEx is a big issue.
Exactly. So it's about balancing economies, and when you get to that crossing point, understanding, how to utilize the cloud against the ground for our customers is the main consideration.
I think workflow, definitely workflow. I mean, if it doesn't make sense to send it to the cloud, if you're not ingesting into the cloud, or whatever your speed to market is, if going to the cloud does not meet that, then it obviously doesn't make sense. But if you have content that you can either source directly into the cloud or the library scenarios, totally makes sense to look into that.
What about, Steve, since you're at NBC, historically NBC concern would be number one, security.
Yeah, no, security is huge.
Not to hear that come up, but you said it's a great time as well.
I think, there's a lot of security that's inherent with the cloud. There's, with all these high-speed file transport, there's security, SSH security is through the transport to the cloud, and then there's all the security at rest that I know a lot of clouds have. So I think it's a perception of security still. There's still audits to be done, but the MPAA signing on helps that case. So I don't think we're there yet, but it's getting there. We're getting more comfortable.
Well, the value proposition of cloud starts to outweigh those concerns at some point. It's like a question about your privacy. Well, at what point is the value you're getting for you to feel more comfortable letting Google manage your health information? Whatever that value. And I think we're starting to see the scale tipping.
I think there's the generational consideration as well. I think that there's a lot of technologists today that are just very comfortable with cloud-based services and applications. That maybe wasn't so true even 3-4 years ago.
Yeah, any one of you using the Hadoop kind of thing to probably, if the file is too big to read?
In our private cloud, we're running on a MapR Hadoop cluster. So we felt that one of the advantages of moving into our, we do most of our processing still done in Amazon or Rackspace, but in the private cloud, S3 wasn't really designed well for large media objects, so we felt we could do something much better, and we leveraged to do that.
So you divide the whole file into multiple chunks and process it?
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
For the purpose of encoding, if let's say you have a 3 gig file or 5 gig file of a video, you divide in multiple chunks and then you process each chunk separately in Hadoop?
We can, and then stitch them back together. Is that what you're asking? Yeah, we can do that. Yeah.
Thank you. Anyone else?
What do you see as the current cloud encoding, let's say, channel capacity, and how do you see that evolving in the future? Like, how fast will the growth, trend be?
I'm sorry. Can you speak up a little bit?
What I was asking is, what is sort of the total number of encoding channels that are being utilized for cloud, based encoding? How many channels? Let's say simultaneous channels that are in the world, just so I can see what the total market is. Pardon me?
Is the question how many servers or how many transcoders are operating?
How many transcoder, simultaneous transcoder capacity, I guess, are you seeing now, and how is that trend going to, evolve in the future?
Well, I mean, I'm not sure I'm answering the question, but from a transcoder capacity, we're running anywhere between, 400 and 800 servers any given second. Dynamic is, we spun up to multiple thousands upon, large, requirements. But that's the beauty of the cloud, right? You don't have to plan for that, and hopefully you have a cloud provider that has enough instance availability that you can leverage that. But that's where we tend to operate. And we process, 50 to 100,000 files a day, roughly, long and short form. So that's about how many servers it takes.
How do you see the trend going in the future? Is it exploding, or is it just a sort of a general?
I would say slightly less than exploding, but we're close to exploding. Yeah, it's been. A lot of it has been. Not only is there a lot more content online, obviously, on web and mobile and set-top box and OTT in general, but it's also the number of renditions that are being generated with each transcode. I've seen that grow quite a bit. When we launched 4 years ago, it's mainly Flash for a couple of bit rates maybe, and now it's HLS, it's Flash, Adobe, a lot less Flash, but HLS and different MP4s and so forth and so on. So it's changed quite a bit from that regard.
The GPUs are definitely more expensive to utilize than CPUs. We give our customers the choice depending on the project. So if it's a low priority library project, then often they'll choose CPU-based processing, because it's more economical. The GPUs they primarily use for high priority content or very high resolution content that they need to turn over really quickly. You gave the example of, next day or even next hour turnaround. So the GPUs, we process content significantly faster than real time. So there's a great advantage there. So it's really about the content and the priority and what they need. And again, it's all a balancing act, right? So there's balancing economics between ground and cloud. There's also balancing economics within the cloud.
Well, so what's the old mantra? You want it quick, you want it cheap, and you want it
Fast.
Well, that would be the quick, right?
Yeah. Good.
Right. Yeah, and you want good quality, pick two.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Great. Any other questions?
Happy Halloween.
Yeah. We're about at the end of our time here anyhow. So thank you all for attending.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Cheers.